Welcome to Spooky Southcoast.
Look, I know the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
Presents Spooky South Coast with your hosts Tim Weisberg and Matt Costa.
Good evening and welcome to Spooky South Coast. Tim Weisberg here, along with the silent assassin Matt Costa and science advisor Matt Moniz for what is an abbreviated edition of Spooky South Coast. Thank you, Boston Red Sox. At least if you're going to make us sit around and wait to start the program, try to win a game. We are here to talk with you about the paranormal, as we are each and every Saturday night. And tonight should be a really, really interesting show because we actually have been doing this show now for like 5 or 6 years.
Six.
5. We were in our sixth year of doing the program. And one of the most requested guests that we have is everybody says, bring on a skeptic, bring on a skeptic. And that's kind of an iffy proposition because, you know, most skeptics per se are reluctant to come on this program. Most skeptics don't want to come on and debate people within the paranormal world, but we have somebody who's joining us tonight who has no problem doing that, and he is a skeptic in the true sense of the word. Moniz, you want to give us your usual definition of how you define skeptics? I know that you think that people who use the term skeptic are not
misleading.
Yeah.
What you get is somebody like me working in science, finding things skeptical. Most skeptics that you see outside that are not really skeptics; they're cynics.
But tonight we have a true skeptic. We have joining us Benjamin Radford. He's a research fellow for the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, the managing editor of Skeptical Inquirer Science Magazine, and the author of 5 books. He has written over 500 articles on various topics, including urban legends, mass hysteria, mysterious creatures, and media criticism. Sorry. See what happens? I have trouble reading when I have to wait for the Red Sox. He is a columnist for Discover News, LiveScience.com, and Skeptical Inquirer. Radford has appeared on the Discovery Channel, CNN, National Geographic Television, the Learning Channel, and the Discovery Science Channel, as well as MTV, and he joins us now here on Spooky South Coast. Good evening, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing well. Good to be on.
Well, and what was the MTV appearance? Were you on remote control?
No, I was actually on a show that was sort of a precursor to MythBusters. It was called the Big Urban Myth Show, and this was a couple years before MythBusters. And they basically they asked various experts to either confirm or deny, or give a sort of middle thumbs up for various urban legends and that sort of thing. And they had me on for a couple different topics. The main one I remember was the organ snatching urban legend, the kidney theft one.
Well, that sounds like way more interesting of a program than Jersey Shore or The Hills.
It certainly was for me, yes.
People forget, though, MTV kind of gave birth to this paranormal investigation reality show thing with their MTV Fear program.
Yeah, I mean, it actually goes way back. You're exactly right. A lot of people don't. They assume that there was nothing really before, the Ghost Hunter guys. In fact, there was quite a bit.
And what are your thoughts? Well, let's just get this right out of the way. What are your thoughts on the way that television portrays paranormal investigation these days?
Well, it's always struck me as being clearly that they're looking for the entertainment value. I see little or no actual science behind these shows. There's little or actual investigation. And having been on quite a few of these TV shows, I'm well aware of the demands that are placed on the producers to come up with a good, sexy, interesting show. And when I do my investigations, again, I try to take a very science-based point of view with it. And the fact of the matter is that much of the research that I do and the investigation I do isn't terribly sexy. It's not terribly camera-friendly. It's, researching archives and double and cross-checking references and stuff. And so it's not things that really make good TV. But that's how it's done. And so I'm afraid that almost all the time the sorts of paranormal investigation that you see on TV is pure pseudoscience. There's occasionally some science thrown in there, but it's awfully bad.
Well, I think that, too, part of the problem with it is being done for the camera, and it is being done for the entertainment value. So even if these groups tried to bring, real, legitimate science into the investigation, the producers of the show might say, yeah, that's not really going to be good for the program.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly heard that argument before, and I think there's some truth to that. But I think that the larger issue is that these subjects are inherently interesting. Ghosts are cool, monsters are cool, crop circles and psychic powers and all these sorts of things. These are inherently fascinating subjects, and so whether you're approaching it from a skeptical point of view or a more believer point of view, I think that there are ways to make these sorts of cases interesting. And I was part of a TV show called Is It Real for National Geographic. I think I did 5 or 6 episodes for them. And to my mind, the Is It Real series was really a high watermark for documentary TV because it was unashamedly scientific and included a lot of skepticism, but it was still an interesting, high-rated show. So I think that the Is It Real series really proves that you can be skeptical and science-based and also get good ratings.
Well, let's talk about that term skeptical, because I think in the paranormal world, the idea, as we mentioned at the top of the show here, the idea of being a skeptic has kind of gotten a bad rap. Like Matt Moniz said, because so many people who claim to be skeptics are actually just cynics. How would you describe being skeptical when it comes to the world of paranormal?
Well, the way that I would describe it is simply asking for good evidence before accepting claims. And that's not much more than that. I mean, the approach that I take is, again, trying to use science and science-based methodologies for examining these things, whatever the given subject is. I mean, essentially, you use the same techniques, or I should say, I use the same techniques to investigate my mysteries as, for example, a homicide detective would to investigate a homicide, or an accountant, forensic accountant would do to do an accountant investigation. So that's how I see skepticism. I actually think that the problem is sort of the opposite of that. I found that I actually don't think that the name skepticism is that useful, or skeptic is that useful, because so many people claim to be skeptics. In fact, when I was researching Chapter 4 from my book, Scientific Paranormal Investigation, basically the whole chapter is talking about the TAPS guys, the ghost hunter crew. And it was interesting when I was researching them is that, and I didn't really fully realize this until I read one of their books, is that they call themselves skeptics. They say several times that we're skeptical, we use science. And they don't use any sort of science or skepticism that I'm aware of. So I think that if anything, the name skeptic has gotten far too diluted, because again, I've talked with many ghost hunters and Bigfoot investigators who say, "Oh yes, I'm very, very skeptical." And when I talk to them, it's clear that they're not skeptical, and they're certainly not using skepticism the way that I do.
Well, yeah, I think what it is they're not looking at skepticism as a school of thought, but they're instead using it as a defensive barrier, kind of, like we would be skeptical of something, kind of like a raised eyebrow.
Sure.
I mean, I don't think it goes beyond that to a lot of people who are claiming to be skeptics. It doesn't. It just goes about as far as not taking it at face value.
Right.
And by skeptical, they mean, well, I want a little bit more information, but I'm still going to say that it's paranormal no matter what.
Right. And to me, that's not skepticism at all. I mean, when I do my investigations, I don't go into trying to debunk. I mean, I am not a debunker. I do not claim to be a debunker. And in fact, I don't really like that phrase. I don't think it's meaningful, and certainly not scientific. Mm-hmm. Science follows the evidence, and if the answer is that this is in fact a ghost, or this is in fact Bigfoot, or this person actually is bending spoons with his head, with his mind, then that's fine. That's where science takes you. So I don't go into a given investigation or case trying to prove or disprove. I go into it trying to understand what the hell's going on, and if the answer is that there is a rational scientific explanation, then I'll do my best to find it. And if the answer is that there is no, if the answer is there in fact is a ghost there, then that's great. I'm all for it.
And just to be clear, you don't believe that you don't disbelieve in the idea of ghosts. You're not saying that they can exist.
No, of course not. That's not scientific. I don't. I've never said, for example, that Bigfoot doesn't exist. I've never said that ghosts cannot exist. I have said that in my experience and in my research, which I've been doing for 10 or 12 years now, I have not found good, compelling, hard evidence of these things. But that's not to say that next month or next year or at some point in the future we may not have good, hard evidence. And so, I approach it from trying to say, what is the evidence? How are people collecting the evidence, and how do we analyze it? Not that this is ridiculous. I mean, in the investigations that I do, if I were absolutely convinced that these things didn't exist, I mean, if I knew for certain that Bigfoot didn't exist or ghosts didn't exist, I wouldn't waste my time. I have better things to do with my time. Or, for example, my new book, Tracking the Chupacabra, I spent 5 years researching this. If I knew from the outset, well, this is ridiculous, the Chupacabra cannot possibly be real, why would I waste all the time and energy that I did? I mean, I want the answer. And again, wherever the evidence leads is where I'm happy to go.
Well, we'll talk about the Chupacabra coming up in the next hour. We do have to take a break for the news. I know I hate these Red Sox games because as soon as the conversation gets rolling, it's time to take a news break. But we are required. Red Sox. Yeah. At least if they won, it would have been worth it. But so we're going to take a break for the news. When we come back, we'll talk about Chupacabra. We'll talk about. I want to get into exactly how you investigate the paranormal scientifically and see how it's different from what a lot of the people that we know in the field do as well. And we'll also take your calls 508-996-0500. 1-877-996-1420. Email spookycrew@spookysouthcoast.com, or you can jump in the chat room on Spooky TV at spookysouthcoast.com. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with more with our guest tonight, Ben Radford. Go to his website, radfordbooks.com, during the break and check out some of his titles. We'll be right back with more here on Spooky South Coast.
First with local news, talk, and sports. This is WBSM New Bedford. Your home broadcasting AM 1420 WBSM.
I'm Chuck Sievertson. Yes, that was us, says NATO, confirming a missile strike on what it calls a command and control center in Libya's capital. But a Libyan government official, Musa Ibrahim, claims it was a house in which Muammar Gaddafi and his wife survived the attack, but Gaddafi's youngest son and 3 grandchildren were killed.
It was the leader's family's turn to give martyrs for the Libyan nation.
Walking through the destroyed building, the BBC's Christian Fraser.
Inside, total destruction. The middle villa had been completely destroyed. There was still a rocket, in fact, that was lying unexploded on the floor. But obviously a lot of collateral damage around the complex and signs that there had been a family gathering. There was still food in the kitchen, the television was on, there was a half-cut apple on the table.
Earlier today, Gaddafi went on Libyan government TV asking for a ceasefire and negotiations. NATO replied, no thanks. A mandatory evacuation order deadline is in 2 hours for Cairo, Illinois, because the Mississippi River is at a historic high because of a rainfall prediction and stresses in the levee in the form of sand boils are appearing. The Army Corps of Engineers is considering blowing a huge hole in a levee downriver, but that would flood many acres of Missouri farmland. Federal officials, including Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano, expected in tornado disaster areas of Mississippi and Alabama tomorrow. Over 300 dead, hundreds more unaccounted for. ABC's Neil Karlinski in Smithville, Mississippi.
We spoke to one family. The family matriarch, a 79-year-old woman, was ripped from her home. Her home is nothing but sticks that's left. She was ripped from it along with the walls. They found her on train tracks 50 yards away, alive. Her leg's broken, but she's alive. She's in the hospital right now.
This says hundreds of volunteers are bringing food, water, and other necessities to tornado survivors. NASA crews going over Space Shuttle Endeavour to find the source of an electrical problem. They say they'll know tomorrow if the shuttle can fly on Monday. You're listening to ABC News.
Flowers blooming, soccer starting, dust bunnies flying. All signs that say, Candace, stock up at Sam's Club.
Member Candace Reed on the Sam's Club Spring Stock Up event with big savings on brand name essentials like Cascade, Glade, Quilted Northern, and more. Not a member? Join now, get a gift card up to $25, and watch the savings add up.
It's a sure sign you're at Sam's Club.
Stock up for spring April 25th to May 3rd at Sam's Club and samsclub.com. Savings made simple.
At the Fram Proving Grounds, failure is not an option. Because failure to trap dirt is not an option for your engine. That's why Fram filters are tested beyond any conditions you'll ever encounter, proven beyond any limits you'll ever push. From the Fram Extra Guard air filter to the Fram Tough Guard oil filter that traps 99% of dirt, Fram's tough technology helps keep miles of wear and tear off your engine. You count on your engine to run right, so it's counting on you to choose the right filter. Fram, don't fail your engine. Find the right deals on Fram at Walmart.
At town hall meetings across the nation, Republicans are being loudly criticized by their constituents for crafting a budget plan that includes cuts in Medicare and Medicaid. ABC's Christiana Amanpour in Washington.
Many are now saying that perhaps the Republicans will start running away from the Ryan plan because of the drastic cuts he calls for in Medicare, Medicaid, and other such programs. But he seems very committed to it, saying that without this kind of thing, there will be a massive crisis.
There he was. The past couple of hours, Donald Trump at a table at the annual White House Correspondents' Dinner in Washington, where laughs are attempted on topics in the news, and the President of the United States speaks. President Obama says now that he's released his long-form birth certificate, Trump can now turn his attention toward issues that really matter.
What really happened in Roswell? And where are Biggie and Tupac?
Also, says the president, whether we faked the moon landing. Then comedian Seth Meyers had the floor.
Donald Trump said recently he has a great relationship with the blacks, though unless the blacks are a family of white people, I bet he's mistaken.
And this happens as a story is surfaced about Trump draft records showing Donald Trump did have a very high draft lottery number, helping him avoid military service during the Vietnam War. But also, he was issued 5 deferments, 4 as a college student, which he has not publicly mentioned before. This is ABC News.
Does your roof need replacing, your house need cleaning, or maybe you're ready to update your kitchen? Big or small, whatever your home improvement need, log on to home.servicemagic.com. ServiceMagic is a free online resource with instant access to pre-screened remodelers, maids, handymen, painters, and many other home contractors. It's easy and it's free. Just go to home.servicemagic.com. home.servicemagic.com. That's home.servicemagic.com.
I'm Chuck Sievertson, ABC News.
Pack up the car with all your gear.
We're all loaded up.
And you get the right direction.
Arriving at destination.
And you set up camp right next to a creek.
I caught a fish!
And it all goes perfectly.
Best trip ever, Dad!
And you're the perfect dad. But even if it doesn't go that way and your gear ends up on the highway, and you get completely lost.
Where are you going?
And your campground is near a beehive. It can still be the perfect camping trip because kids don't always see things the way you see them.
Best trip ever, Dad!
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings in foster care who'll take you just as you are. For more information on how you can adopt, go to adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt Us Kids, and the Ad Council.
Attention, business owners and individuals who owe the IRS. Do you owe thousands of dollars in back taxes? You need aggressive representation. Call Certified Tax Now at 800-358-4288 and speak to one of our tax attorneys, enrolled agents, or tax professionals who specialize in tax liens, back taxes, tax debts, wage garnishments, and collections. We won't waste a minute helping you with your tax problems. We'll be on the phone with the IRS within 30 minutes of you becoming a client. We settle millions of tax issues for a fraction of the cost. Find the peace of mind knowing the IRS will not be knocking on your door. Protect your home, business, and family today. We know the tax laws and we act fast. Call today for your free no-obligation consultation. 800-358-4288. Remember, we'll be on the phone with the IRS within 30 minutes of you becoming a client. That's guaranteed. Call Certified Tax at 800-358-4288. That's 800-358-4288. Again, 800-358-4288.
1 in 12 children in Uganda is left alone. This year, Citadel Broadcasting is supporting the worthwhile cause of Ray of Hope in Africa to build a children's home, medical center, and school. Every dollar you give will help a child in need whose only chance for a better life is through your contributions. For more information about Ray of Hope in Africa and how you can help, go to rayofhopeinafrica.org. Ray of Hope in Africa is a division of Humanitarian Hands Foundation.
Come closer. God would like to have a word with you.
It's called the Bible. And you'll want to read a translation that's easy to understand, yet rich with the detail found in the original scripture. The new international version of the Bible is relied upon by millions of people around the world. But if you take a closer look, you'll see it was written just for you. Visit the NIVBible.com for more information. The NIV. Come closer.
Tom Bodette here to pitch a new reality show. Take several hundred total strangers, some talented pets, a British guy, and a bunch of folks who think they can sing or dance with stars while cooking crabs. Check them all in the same Motel 6 and see how they cope with the lowest price of any national chain. It'll be huge, dog. I'm Tom Bodette for Motel 6, and we'll leave the light on for you. Book online at motel6.com.
Mother's Day is not for celebrating moms. It's for celebrating all our moms have given us. And now, celebrating those things is even easier with new postage-paid cards, only from Hallmark. Just pick the perfect card, then sign, seal, and send. No stamp required. So this Mother's Day, tell your mom how much she means to you with new postage-paid cards, available everywhere Hallmark is sold.
Postage paid available for select cards, U.S. only.
You're a coward. You got nothing to be afraid of. Step aside, I'll show you.
Turn on all your lights, lock the doors, and pull down the shades. Spooky South Coast is back.
Oh my! Oh, woe is me!
All right, welcome back to Spooky South Coast. Tim Weisberg here, along with the silent assassin Matt Costa and science advisor Matt Moniz, talking about the paranormal. And tonight our guest is Benjamin Radford. He is a research fellow for the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry and the managing editor of Skeptical Inquirer Science Magazine. He's also the author of 5 books, including the latest one, Tracking the Chupacabra, as well as Lake Monster Mysteries, Media Mythmakers, Hoaxes, Myths, and Manias, and Scientific Paranormal Investigation. And they are all available on his website, radfordbooks.com, which is linked up with spookysouthcoast.com. And we've got all of his books in the Spooky Store there as well if you want to pick them up. And we were talking before the break, Ben, about the Chupacabra a little bit and how you spent 5 years investigating it to put this book together. How do you spend 5 years investigating something that nobody can seem to get their hands on?
Well, that's a great question. And basically, what I found was that that it all depends on which version of the Chupacabra you're looking at. There's actually 2 main versions. There's the original version that appeared in 1995 in Puerto Rico, which is a bipedal, spiky-backed, alien-type monster with long, thin arms and legs. And that was the one that sort of is the best-known sort of artistic depiction. And that was cited for a period of about 3 or 4 years until around 2000, 2001 or so. And then it sort of faded away, and then a second type of Chupacabra emerged around 2005. And in this particular case, you did have bodies, you did have hard evidence, and so there were a series of about half dozen or so hairless or nearly hairless quadrupeds, canids, basically animals that were essentially looked like dogs or coyotes or foxes. And so that was basically where I started, was looking at the hard evidence. Where we have a dead body, then we can apply scientific methodologies and forensics to them. And so I began by looking at the DNA tests, because there were a variety of DNA tests done on various chupacabras that were found in Cuero, Texas, and Blanco, Texas, and Elmendorf, Texas as well. So that's sort of where I started, was going to the hard forensic sort of CSI type evidence, and then getting more into the background of it, the history, and the folklore behind it.
Well, one of the things that's fascinated me about Chupacabra, at least in the limited research that I've done into it, is that you hear a lot of people in the paranormal world who talk about investigating the Chupacabra, and they talk about how it's this mythological creature that's been around for so many years, but the reports are really only within the last 20 years, right?
Yeah, in fact, the reports only date back to 1995. which makes the chupacabra all the more unusual, and that's one of the reasons that I was really attracted to it. Was, you know, if you look at Bigfoot, for example, or the Loch Ness Monster, Mothman, was certainly the first two. The stories about them date back decades. Some would argue hundreds of years, if you want to sort of include Native American myths and stories in that.
Mm-hmm.
But in the case of the chupacabra, as far as anybody can tell, and I've done, you know, quite a bit of research on it, it essentially did not exist prior to 1995. So it just emerged, sort of popped into the world. It's like all of a sudden in August of '95, and again that sort of made the creature all the more strange. And then the other aspect, of course, is that it's a vampire. So unlike Bigfoot or unlike the Loch Ness Monster, it sucks blood. And so that was another sort of intriguing twist to the whole story.
So all these, you know, supposed stories that we hear about how it comes from folklore, there's nothing in Puerto Rican or Hispanic folklore that mentions any similar creature?
There is not, and I've looked, and in fact, I even offered a reward. I offered a $250 reward just a couple weeks back on Cryptomundo website for anybody that could find a printed, published reference to a chupacabra, meaning a vampire beast, chupacabra. There actually is a version of chupacabra that's a bird. It's a bird that allegedly sucks milk out of goats, not blood. But in terms of, you know, an actual vampire beast called the chupacabra, there's no evidence at all that predates 1995. But, you know, in my book, what I basically do is I draw upon the global folklore behind vampires, and so I sort of trace it back to European vampires, Latin American vampires, even African vampires. And in that context, the chupacabra actually fits very well as a sort of a very modern, updated version of the European vampire.
What about gargoyles?
What about gargoyles?
They're a close representation.
In what way?
Just the original 1995 description. A lot of early gargoyles had the same type of lizard-like bipedal flying type of creature.
Well, the main distinguishing characteristic of the chupacabra is the spikes on the back, and I'm not aware of many representations of gargoyles, certainly that were in European churches, that had the spikes on the back.
Not spikes, but yeah, they had bony protrusions on their backs regularly.
It does seem like it's a prototypical depiction of what you would think a scary, you know, vampire beast would look like. I mean,
Right.
it's a little bit smaller than I'd expect it to be in my nightmares.
Right. Well, that's the other interesting thing is that the chupacabra. If you go back and look at the original reports, and one particular original report that was given by a woman named Madeline Tolentino of Canovanas, Puerto Rico, in August of '95. She gave a very, very descriptive, detailed account of what she said it looked like. You know, in fact, when I traveled to Puerto Rico to interview her for the book, and later on in her 2010 interview, she told me that it was actually only about 3 feet tall, which is somewhat smaller than most people would sort of assume that the chupacabra might look like. But yeah, it's fascinating, and especially, you know, sort of a midget dwarf gargoyle thingy.
Now, there was an interesting question that popped up in the chat room on SpookySouthcoast.com's Spooky TV page, and it does make you think a little bit. And I don't know if you can answer this, but what's the timeline between when these reports first happened in August of '95 and the episode on the chupacabra that aired on the X-Files? And were there any increased reportings or sightings after that episode aired?
I can answer that, in fact. I mentioned the X-Files episode in the book. And as far as I could tell, I actually traced it back, given the typical production timeline for most TV shows. As far as I could tell, that episode was written within about 6 or 9 months of the original Chupacabra furor in Puerto Rico, again being August and September, and going into December and all that in '95. And so as far as I can tell, it was written within a few months of it being, oh my God, here's the new creature, and then they scripted that and then put that in there. Certainly, one of the most interesting parts about the chupacabra is how much it is a product of the mass media. And you can actually draw. In the book, I talk about how there are a couple leaps that it made. Not physical leaps, but figurative leaps between, and some physical leaps as well. But in how it sort of became the world's third best known monster in the world after Bigfoot and Nessie. And one of them was that the original description was drawn out by a UFO researcher by the name of Jorge Martin, who then put it on the internet, and so it essentially went viral in 95, 96. The second thing that happened was that a TV show called Christina, which is sort of like the Spanish language version of Oprah. It's very popular in Latin American Spanish-speaking areas. Christina did an episode on the chupacabra, and almost immediately, right after that episode aired, people were suddenly reporting the chupacabra in Spanish-speaking areas all around the world, primarily in places like Nicaragua, Mexico, and parts of Florida, for example. So you can draw a very strong parallel between the publication and the spreading of the idea of the chupacabra and subsequent reports.
Well, that's another thing that we'd love to talk with you about. We could do a whole episode on, and that's the media perpetuation of these myths. And in some ways, they create these myths, and in some ways, they just pick up the ball and run with it. And then you get the increased reports based on, the fact that it's appearing in newspapers and on television shows. And it's interesting that you say that it's the number 3 most recognized creature behind Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, because it really is that media attention that's been paid to it that created that. It's not, reports around the world. It's not, 50 years of sightings that have led to that popularity. It's basically just media coverage of it.
You're exactly right. And in fact, one of the contributions I made in terms of trying to understand the original Puerto Rican chupacabra was I went back and I looked at the news coverage. And what you find is that the original coverage in Puerto Rico in late 95 and early 96 particularly, most of the stories, and in fact even earlier, but this is before they actually called it the chupacabra and had a face to it, most of these stories were spread by rumors and gossip and tabloids. There's a very famous tabloid newspaper called El Vocero in Puerto Rico, and not all the stories of chupacabra appeared there, but the majority of them did. And of course, this is sort of our version of National Enquirer or Weekly World News. But it's also mixed in with real murders and homicides and sort of true celebrity stories. So it wasn't treated at the time as being sort of like, oh, here's a Bigfoot and Elvis sighting. This was treated as very much a real menace, and was taken very seriously in many places. In my book, I talk about there were actually armed mobs that were armed with machetes and guns and knives and sticks that would be searching the night, looking for the chupacabra to kill it.
Well, you mentioned the fact that with the second wave of chupacabra, that there has been bodies associated with it. And what has been the media coverage of the findings of those? Because I would guess that they're pretty easy to debunk as being sorry to use that word, but they're pretty easy to explain away as being some other type of creature.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because what happened was that for the people who believed in the chupacabra originally, there was a growing frustration because people were having chupacabra sightings, and people were finding dead animals that they believed had been drained of blood, typically goats. Of course, chupacabra means goat sucker in Spanish, but not just goats. There would also be cattle and domestic pets and things like that, and chickens and whatnot. But nobody had ever found any hard evidence, and so by say 2004, 2005, people were starting to say, well, what the hell is going on here? There seems to be a real blood-sucking vampiric creature somewhere around here, but we're not finding any hard evidence. And then when you started seeing the sort of type 2 or Texas chupacabras emerging, in many ways that was a mixed blessing for the chupacabra believers, because on one hand, you finally had evidence. You finally had a dead body. It wasn't just glimpses of things. It wasn't just eyewitness reports. There's a weird hairless dead animal right in front of me. So that sort of boosted the idea of the chupacabra, but it was also a double-edged sword because, as you pointed out, when you do have hard evidence, you have either a living or a recently deceased creature, you can do DNA tests on it. And when those tests came back, almost invariably they came back being either dogs or coyotes, with an occasional raccoon thrown in. And of course, those are by definition not chupacabras, although I should add that the most famous chupacabra, the one that was found in 2007 in Cuero, Texas, by a woman named Phyllis Canyon, she did the DNA test, and that did come back coyote. And she at first disputed that, and then she later agreed it. And so, but it's important to realize she still believes that she has the chupacabra. That is, Phyllis Canyon and the most famous, chupacabra, she believes that the chupacabra is a coyote mixed with wolf.
So you're telling me that the chupacabra that I've seen with my own eyes, that I paid 50 cents to get into a tent to see, was really nothing more than just a dead coyote?
I'm not sure which one you paid 50 cents for.
I don't know. I just was at the fair.
I can tell you the one that I paid 50 cents for, and that was a pretty good gaff at the county fair.
It was the same tent where I saw the two-headed cow that literally somebody just glued a dead cow's head onto a living cow.
Well, exactly. There you go. So you get what you pay for.
Yeah, and when you're only paying 50 cents for something that should legitimately cost $6 or $7 in today's economy.
Or exactly right. Yeah, I mean,
freak show prices should be going up too. I don't know why they haven't.
That's what I think.
So, well, when you're talking about chupacabra, though, you're talking about just another one of these, these mythical creatures, another one of these things that are kind of beyond the veil that we can't quite get to with our modern capabilities, that it seems like. But you do use scientific methods in your investigation. Can you just describe for us briefly exactly what that means?
You mean in the case of chupacabra specifically, or just in general?
Just in general. I mean, what's the difference between the way you might investigate, say, a ghost report, and you've I don't want to say debunked.
Well, no. I mean, it's a fair question. I mean, I have debunked. I have debunked claims, but that was the end result. That wasn't the intention. So, if I investigate a claim and it turns out not to be true, it's been disproven or it's been debunked. But that wasn't. that was just how it turned out to be. So that's fair enough.
Well, let's go with ghost investigation, because
Sure.
so much of our audience are paranormal investigators. What would be the difference between the way that you approach an investigation of a ghost sighting as opposed to what you might have seen others do, or what we see on mainstream television?
Sure. There's quite a bit. In fact, I devote all of Chapter 4 in my scientific paranormal investigation book to exactly this question. In fact, on my website, radfordbooks.com, there's actually a free downloadable PDF. I think it's like a 16-page piece on the top 5 ghost hunting mistakes. So that's available for free in case anyone wants to poke at it. But there's a couple ways. One of them is that I only use methods and equipment that have been proven to work, and by that I mean I don't use EMF detectors, because electromagnetic field detectors have never been proven to detect ghosts. There are many, people. A lot of times, ghost hunters will adopt this equipment because they think they're supposed to, or they see it on TV, or whatever else, or someone sends them a flyer, or they see a web advertisement or something else that encourages them to buy these things. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, except for the fact that there's no evidence at all that ghosts emit or absorb or have anything to do with electromagnetic fields. So that's one of the problems, is that if you're using this equipment and you're thinking that you're actually detecting ghosts, you're not. And so the problem is that you need to question your assumptions. You have to understand, what is this equipment doing, and is it really doing what I believe it's doing? So that would be one difference, is that the equipment and the gear that I use are things that I know for a fact work. Another example would be not using psychics and not using dowsing rods or anything, pendulums or anything else like that, for exactly the same reason. Psychic powers, and some of your audience members may disagree, but the fact of the matter is that psychic powers have never been proven to exist, and certainly not scientifically. And so the question then becomes, why would you use a method or a research method or type that has never been proven to work? And so I guess the biggest problem that I have with the ghost hunters and the TAPS crew and many ghost investigators that I meet is that in my opinion, they're not taking it seriously. It would be one thing if they were taking it seriously and they really wanted to genuinely understand and they had a good basis and understanding of scientific methodologies and they go forward with it. But unfortunately, a lot of times when I talk to people, and I have some friends of mine are ghost hunters. I'm actually on good terms with many of them. Mm-hmm. But if they're going to ask me, what do you think about my methods? I'm going to be honest. I'm going to say, to be honest with you, I don't see that what you're doing is doing any good. And let me just wrap up by saying that I think the other thing that distinguishes my work is that I actually solve mysteries. I've solved dozens and dozens of mysteries. In fact, there's many of them that are solved in my book, Scientific Paranormal Investigation, and other places. So if you look at the track record for many ghost hunters and many paranormal investigators and the TAPS guys and whatever else, every now and then they solve a mystery, they solve a case, but the majority of them are just sort of, we investigated this place and we got an orb photo, or we have EVP, and at the end of the investigation, there's no real answer. It's just sort of, I don't know. We got an orb, and there's no conclusive answer. But the investigations that I do, certainly ones I've done so far, there is an actual definitive answer, and that's certainly the case with the chupacabra. It is the mystery is solved, and that's one thing that I think distinguishes my work from many other people's.
Well, let's take a step back here a little bit on the ghost investigation side of things. I mean, I know a number of investigators who have spent the time and devoted the time and efforts to learn how to properly use the equipment. I mean, a lot of people will buy something because they see it used on a television show and say, I've got to have, this, or I've got to have that. But I know a number of people have taken the time to actually learn, how to use it properly, what it means when they use it, and what the different fluctuations mean. Mm-hmm. My question to you is, you said that there hasn't been any proof that if there are ghosts that they use electromagnetic field. But right. Then how do you explain the electromagnetic field anomalies that often happen associated alongside places that have ghost reports?
Well, I think the better question is, how do we know that they are ghosts?
How do we know they're not?
Well, how do we know they're not elves or gremlins or dragons?
We don't.
Right.
But
exactly.
All it is just data that you use in the process of measuring what you're doing. It's just one more data point. It isn't a proof or disproof. It's just a data point that helps add to your summation at the end.
So what's the point in using equipment that won't prove or disprove anything?
Just to help you guide along the way. Are you heading in the right or wrong direction?
But if the equipment that you're using, as you just said, can't tell you one way or the other, what's the point?
What's the point of doing this at all, period? But if you're going to do something, at least take some sort of measurements along the way.
No, I would agree with you. I think the problem is that, and again, I talk about this in the book, is that most of the investigators that I see, they have no good understanding of scientific and statistical methodologies, and so they'll go into a haunted house and they'll take measurements, and they'll be like, oh my God, we're going to take measurements here and there, and they're under the illusion that if they take a couple measurements, supposedly before the ghost investigation or before the ghost hunt, and they write these down, that somehow that's enough data points to compare an anomaly. And it's not. I mean, you would need to go to a given haunted location for weeks or possibly months ahead of time to record enough data points to get a reliable baseline. And I have yet to find an investigator that's doing that.
Well, you just have, but that's beside the point. I've been doing this 25 years.
And how's your results?
Not bad. I work as an analytical chemist during the day and have for the past 20 years.
How many cases have you solved?
solved?
Yes.
You don't really solve these.
I solved them, absolutely. I've solved plenty of cases.
I mean, you can uncover erroneous results, or things that are maybe causing something else. But the other cases where there are no logical explanation, I've had stuff happen with at least 20 other people standing right there, with no physical reason that I can understand why this happened. Why did this object all of a sudden levitate through the middle of the room, stop, hover, and then continue on without anybody touching it?
So let me just make sure I understand. So you're saying that because you don't understand it, it's unexplainable?
In the terms of physics I was taught.
Okay, so do you use that same logic elsewhere, where if you encounter something that you personally don't understand, you assume that it's paranormal?
I assume that it's something I don't understand. I'm not going to say that it's it's. I'm not going to make up a scientific explanation for it if I don't know what it is. That's what I'm saying.
Right. I mean, I encounter things all the time that I don't fully understand, but I don't assume that I know everything, and that if it were explainable, that I would know how to explain it.
All right, but my point is, you got to take readings, and I go to places continuously and take readings and to establish what I would feel to be a norm. Now, if people are taking the stance that a ghost, for lack of a better term, is a disembodied soul, a soul being energy, and energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only changed, as we know or have been taught, then energy should affect various fields electromagnetically, and this is the theory of why people use EMF meters.
Right. Well, why are you choosing that particular definition of ghost?
I'm saying that's generally the most popular.
Sure, but just because something's popular doesn't mean it's valid. I mean, at one point, as I'm sure you would admit, just because most people think something is true doesn't mean it's true, right?
Correct.
Right. So are you just arbitrarily choosing one particular definition of ghost, or do you examine other ones?
But I examine them all. I take all of them. I'm just using this particular point as to why most people use an EMF meter, because this is what they thought.
And that also seems to be what your evidence that you've gathered over the course of your 25 years seems to point toward.
Yeah, there's something interacting with the field.
I mean, I have,
what it is, I can't exactly say yet, one way or another.
I kind of follow the same school of thought of, the energy field that is kind of holding some sort of form. I don't believe in the idea of a soul necessarily, but I do believe that there's an energy network within organic human body that needs to dissipate out upon death, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it holds that form, and I'm still trying to figure out why it holds an intelligence if it does.
Right, well, and that's exactly one of the questions that I would have is if people are telling me that if someone presents me with an EVP, my question is how exactly are you claiming that this ghost can create a voice? The only way that we know that voices can be created is through physical mechanisms, vocal cords and lips and tongues and things like that. And presumably ghosts don't have those. And so I have yet to have anyone who's knowledgeable about the subject explain to me how exactly a disembodied spirit could have a voice.
But it's also the same idea too that. Like Moni said, with the idea of the popular theory, going by, it's become so convoluted in how people define things now that we have basically just an amalgamation of 45 different approaches to how to investigate the paranormal that we don't really know which theory or which particular school of thought we're heading toward anymore.
No, I would agree with that. I mean, in fact, I think that's absolutely true. And this is to my mind is one of the inherent flaws in the way that a lot of the investigation is being conducted. Is that I can give you a half dozen different definitions of ghost that I've encountered over the years. Some people think they're telepathic projections. Some people think that they're spirits. Soul. There's all sorts of different ideas. The problem is that without hard evidence pointing in one direction or another, one theory or one assumption is as good as the next, and so that doesn't give you a very good basis upon which to do experiments and investigation.
There's always that old standby that people will fall back on too, where we can't use the scientific method to explain it because it doesn't fit our science.
Yeah, I don't buy that. I think that, for example, if you're gonna tell me that, then the question is, well, why then allegedly do ghosts appear on film, on videos, and in recordings? I mean, if you can't have it both ways, you can't say that the ghosts are at the same time both beyond our science and beyond our senses, and yet they are recorded, they're experienced in a variety of ways. I mean, it can't be both.
Is it possible, though, that as we get more, I guess, I don't want to say more scientific data, because, like you said, if it's not accumulated in what science generally agrees upon, then it's not considered scientific data. Mm-hmm. But as we have more of these, I don't want to name anything in particular, but more of these devices that people are out using, do you think that that's kind of just convoluting the fact that there's this supposed device that'll do this? It's going to make people stand by shoddy evidence even more because they captured it with something they paid $300 or $400 for?
You mean like Frank's box?
Well, no, Frank's box, you can get those for a lot cheaper. But, when people go out and spend, $10,000 on a thermal imaging camera because they saw it on Ghost Hunters, that means that every little hotspot on there has to be paranormal activity, right? Because you got to get your money's worth.
Well, you're exactly right, and that's one of the problems that I have. And I mean, look, this sort of gets back to, I think, one of the fundamental problems, which is that, and you all may disagree, but my position is that the evidence for ghosts has not gotten any better over the last decades and years. I mean, people have been searching for ghosts, depending on how you want to interpret the word searching, for well over 100 years. I mean, the Victorians held seances and did all sorts of SPR stuff. So, people have been looking for ghosts for a long, long, long time now. And the problem is that even with all the new technology, even with all the gadgets and the FLIR cameras and all this sort of stuff, the evidence is not getting any better. And you would expect that if these things are really out there, and if improved technology translated into improved results, that we would be closer. You and I would be able to say, this is what we know about ghosts that we didn't know last month or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But there is no fact that we know. There is not a single, knowledge point or data point or fact that we can all say, well, we now know that ghosts do X or they have this characteristic. And so it seems to me at some point you have to sort of take a step back and say, why is that? Why is it that with so many ghost hunters and so much gear and so much equipment and so many alleged hauntings and whatever else, why isn't the accumulated evidence getting any better?
Well, we're getting a flurry of activity happening in the chat room on Spooky TV at SpookySouthcoast.com, but I can't keep up with everything that everybody's asking during the course of the conversation. So we invite you to call in 508-996-0500, 1-877-996-1420. And you can also email questions, spookycrew at SpookySouthcoast.com. But feel free to jump in the discussion, folks, because obviously Ben is making some points that you may or may not agree with. But remember to keep an open mind, though, too, because if you don't, then you're just as cynical as you would accuse a quote-unquote skeptic of being as well. So one of the things that is fascinating to me about modern ghost hunting is the fact that people are so willing to turn their back on psychics or mediums going along on an investigation, but they'll just as easily pick up a device like a Frank's box, which is essentially just an electronic version of the same thing. What if that human element is key to having the paranormal activity occur, whether it be some sort of empathetic wave that it gives to the paranormal, or whether it be that it's merely a projection of the person investigating themselves?
That's a great question, and who knows? I mean, if ghosts are real, and if they are the spirits of the departed, then yeah, I guess it's logical to say that maybe you have to have a human element in there, that you can't just. You can't just put a video camera in a place and come back the next day and find stuff. That could certainly be. I guess the problem that you encounter, of course, is that anytime there's the human element, there is the possibility and indeed the probability of interpretation problems. And someone saying, "Oh, you listening to EVP?" Is like, "Meh, did you hear that? It's Mary. No, it's Larry. It's Harry. It's your back is hairy." I mean, come on. I've heard so many bad quality EVPs in my life that at some point you have to recognize that so much of the stuff is filtered through very, very biased people's perceptions. And I don't mean biased in terms of being necessarily bad or stupid. Just we all have our inherent perceptions, and we see the world through certain prisms. And it's a well-known psychological fact that people will, if you give someone a context for a haunting, oftentimes they will in fact interpret ordinary mundane events within that context and believe them to be ghosts.
You mentioned that you've heard so many bad quality EVPs. Have you heard good quality EVPs?
I've heard better quality ones. It depends on what you mean by quality. If you mean quality of evidence, I haven't heard any real great ones. I'm waiting to hear a good one that sort of actually gives verifiable information that neither the person that took neither the person that's listening to it or the person that took it has. For example, contacting the spirit of, say, Natalie Holloway, if she's dead, and saying, "Natalie Holloway, where are you buried? What happened to you?" And having that information being translated to a person and going, saying, "Oh my God, this ghost told us exactly where this was. There's no other explanation for this sort of thing."
But there have been cases of that. There have been instances of that where it has led to other information. I mean, maybe it just hasn't come across your radar, but I've heard plenty of reports. And I don't want to go back to the psychic thing, but too, how many times have law enforcement used psychics and actually done it to good success?
Well, it's funny you should ask that. I've actually investigated psychic detectives quite a bit. In fact, in my book, Scientific Paranormal Investigation, I tackled what was presented to me as the best case ever of psychic detectives, and I spent 18 months researching that case, and I don't have time to go into the whole. It didn't turn out to be quite so true.
Well, I mean, I can say from personal experience, and I can't really say much about it, but we had an instance where information was passed on to us that came from supposedly the other side, and when it was presented to the police department, it was kind of like one of those, "Hey, how'd you guys know about that?"
Yeah, we'll take this over from here.
Yeah,
I would love to hear the story, the case. I mean, honestly, I'm open-minded about it, and I would either send me an email out after the show. I would be happy to look into that. It sounds interesting.
Sure, I'll have Moniz handle that because he has all the details. All right, well, we have a call on the line, so let's go to the phones. Again, if you want to call in, 508-996-0500, 1-877-996-1420 are the numbers. Good evening. You are on Spooky Southcoast with our guest, Ben Radford. How you doing?
Not too bad. How you doing, guys?
We are spooktacular.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. How's it going, Ben?
Hey there. Spooktacular.
It was great to hear it tonight. Actually, you know what? I'm a critical thinker, and I really enjoyed listening to you. And just had one really quick question.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about using the meters and stuff like that. When it comes to like ghosts and stuff like that, and what people are perceiving as ghosts, do you think there's like different ways we can kind of go after this? Like maybe when people are using, I don't know, the magnetic field meters and stuff like that, using that and going after that, or EVP, should we be specializing and trying to figure out one thing versus trying to group it all into one big thing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think that I have quite a few ideas in terms of how to bring more science to ghost investigation. I think the fundamental thing is that people need to decide what characteristics they believe ghosts have. And that's very important because if you're investigating something, whether you're a scientist or a homicide detective or anything else, if you're going to say, I'm trying to understand X, by definition, you need to understand what are the characteristics of X, what distinguishes it from Y or Z. And so it seems to me one of the best way to go about it would be to decide for yourself this is what I believe ghosts are, and they have these characteristics. And for example, one of the main themes over the last decade or so has been that ghosts, as we talked about before, give off electromagnetic field and electromagnetic waves. Well, if that's true, then there should then EMF detectors are in fact the correct equipment and gear for that. The problem is that so far to date, and I'm sure some of you would disagree, but so far there's not good evidence that they in fact do give off electromagnetic fields. And just because you have an anomaly, just because you have something that you can't explain or that you think is unusual for the area, does not mean it's a ghost. So that's one of the things is trying to determine, what characteristics are you nailing down as a ghost, and if after you investigate that, then you determine that yes, then you can devise tests and equipment to use for that. And if later on those tests turn out to be negative and you're not getting any information, then you say, okay, well, maybe a ghost isn't X, maybe it has these characteristics, and then you move on to the next one. But at least if you're doing that, then you're going about it methodically, and you're covering all the bases instead of this sort of wild west, who knows what the hell a ghost is, and you're just basically shooting in the dark.
Yep. All right.
Good point. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for calling in. All right, if anybody else would like to call in, again, the number is 1-877-996-1420, 508-996-0500 are the numbers. And I do want to mention, before we let you go, Ben, Matt Costa is actually looking at your site here on the computer here in the studio, and your game Playing Gods, it looks like it's a blast.
Well, yeah, it's every now and then someone will, it's the world's what I call it, the world's the board game of divine domination. It's basically the world's first board game of religious warfare. And so, as you can imagine, Target wasn't going to touch it, but it actually is a fun game, whether you're a skeptic or believer.
Well, religious warfare should really be done in board game format. I think the world would be a much happier and more peaceful place if that was the way that it was handled.
Exactly. That was the. I'm glad you got the satire there. That was exactly my point. Is that if everybody would just leave each other alone, accept each other, and quit killing each other for other people's religions, I just get tired of it. Just live and let live, and be good to each other, and go hunt for ghosts.
There you go. Now, the game itself, is it one of those, kind of like a Warcraft type game, or one of those games where it's really involved, or is it just a typical board game?
It's sort of halfway between Risk and maybe Monopoly or something. It's strictly a board game. I haven't yet developed anything in terms of being an online game or anything else like that. I purposely, when I was designing the game, I wanted it to go sort of old school because I grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons and Risk and that sort of things, and so I enjoyed the strategy games, and so it's again, I would say it's about the same complexity level as Risk, but of course you get to be Buddha with a chain gun, so that adds to it.
Yeah. I mean, that just shows my own ignorance about a lot of these games. I said Warcraft, but I meant Warhammer.
Yeah.
So, but I just remember going into the comic book shop and seeing all these guys playing that, and saying, I have no idea what they're doing. Let me just get my Spider-Man and go home.
Exactly.
But it does look like a lot of fun. It is available through your website, radfordbooks.com, if people want to pick that up, as well as your books. And again, in the time that we have left, we have about 10 minutes left, and I do want to kind of get back into a little bit more about the idea of one of the topics of your books, media myth makers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that is a pet topic here on Spooky Southcoast, especially with Chris Balzano, our content director, is the way that the media shapes our opinions and our beliefs of things. Just talk a little bit about that book and basically what you dove into there.
Yeah, that was actually I think that was 2003, if I remember right, or 2005. And, I had always grown up in a family of journalists, and I had always been critical of the news media, and I had just seen so much crap out there. And I finally got disgusted with it. And the subtitle of the book is How Journalists, Activists, and Advertisers Mislead Us. And so I wanted to sort of take a hammer to a lot of the BS that we see, everything from sensationalized media stories. I talk about for example, when Princess Diana died, and just days and hours and weeks of coverage about it, and much to the detriment of real legitimate news stories. I mean, I felt bad for Diana myself, and lots of people did, but it was just so incommensurate with the real problems in the world. And so I talk about everything from emotional legislation, for example, and the ways in which the news media do a job of basically scaring the public on a wide variety of things, everything from drug laws to the predator panic, for example, the idea that sex offenders are behind every tree and they're attacking kids left, right, and center. Well, in fact, if you look at the statistics, actually the main people that attack children, both physically and sexually, are parents and caregivers. It's not some unknown stranger down the road in a trench coat. It's somebody the child knows, and the family knows. And so, in cases like that, the real problem is that the nation's fears and concerns are being misplaced, and so everyone's like, oh my God, look over here and look at this big problem, and it certainly is a problem. I mean, there is it does happen, but the vast majority of these crimes, particularly against children, are committed again by parents and friends of the family, and most people don't realize that, and so they put all this time and attention and concern into areas that really aren't helping people. And so I go into the Columbine story, 9/11, hoaxed authors, news bias, and things like that.
Well, as we know, fear sells, and it's pretty much the only thing left that's a guaranteed sell. Well, that and sex.
Well, there you go.
But and I'm sure since you've written that book, things have only gotten worse because the idea of what is the media has been kind of crumbled even more with not only the death of my business, the newspaper business, which is kind of on life support now, but also the idea that, the regular old mastheads are no longer news, and now the news comes from things like TMZ and Radar Online.
Right. Exactly, and that's one of the interesting things about the sort of democratization of news, where you have some of the old guard, the what used to be the credible, the big three or big four networks, and then that sort of phased into this 24-hour news cycle with CNN and MSNBC and these other things, and of course with the emergence of the internet. And it's tempting to sort of say, oh, my God, isn't this horrible? And in many ways, it is bad. I mean, there's no denying that, especially with the dearth of newspapers, one of the great things about newspapers is they actually did investigation. They had full-time staff writers and journalists who did investigative work. And with the demise of newspapers, they're not totally gone, and I'm pleased to say I do subscribe to the New York Times and the local paper as well. So I do my bit to support, but a lot of that is just lost in today's news cycle. Everything is trying to be there. The goal is not to get things right; is to get there first and to put the story out. And if by the way later on we realize that half of the news story was wrong, well, at least we got there first. And I don't like that at all.
And of course, that that media is now influenced the paranormal community because they've basically taken what was once a small pursuit from a small segment of the population and basically turned it into, the new reality. Basically everybody wanted to be on Temptation Island and Survivor, 10 years ago, and now they all want to be ghost hunters.
You're exactly right, and that's a very good point. And I keep meaning to write an article about the influence of the Ghost Hunters TV show, and I don't think I'm going to surprise anybody by saying I'm not real impressed with it. But it's just remarkable how much they've influenced ghost hunting and paranormal investigation. I think not for the better, but I'm sure others would disagree. But whether you part of the problem is that I've actually encountered many cases where these TV shows have actually harmed people. I did a couple investigations where The family they did not have a ghost. They clearly did not have a ghost. But part of the reason they believed they did have a ghost was because they're like, well, I saw this on TV. I saw an episode, and they had these voices, and they had these things, and they were very, very clearly being influenced by the Ghost Hunters TV show and other ones like it. And it just made me sick because they did not have a ghost, and I could prove to them they didn't have a ghost. But they're like, well, no, I'm convinced. I saw it on TV. And I think the TAPS crew, I think they've actually done quite a bit more damage than people realize. And a lot of times I've actually had to go and clean up their mess and fix things and fix people that have been damaged through their misinformation about ghosts.
Well, it's kind of a double-edged sword, In a way, it's brought more attention to the subject of the paranormal. It's gotten people more willing to talk about it, more interested in it. But at the same time, it's also created a pseudoscience around it. Maybe the cream will rise to the top. And just do me a favor, Ben. Don't. And I'm sure you're smart enough that you understand this too. But you can't base somebody's investigations on what they do for a television camera either, because sometimes the paycheck and the lure of the spotlight is enough to make you kind of put your credibility on hold for a little while.
Absolutely.
While they're willing to cut you a check.
No, absolutely, and I agree with that. And it's again, I sort of come at it from both criticizing the media, which I do on a regular basis, and of course I did in my book Media Mythmakers, and also being on the investigation side of things. So you're absolutely right. It's not fair to just sort of say, well, this is pure pseudoscientific BS because it's on TV, because we as we started began by talking about there are demands that TV puts on people, and even the best intended people, and TV can pervert that and turn it into a circus, and that's unfortunate.
All right. Thank you for joining us, Ben Radford. His website is radfordbooks.com. If you want to check out some of his titles, including the latest, Tracking the Chupacabra, you can get them all there, and they're in the Spooky store at SpookySouthcoast.com as well. Ben, hopefully you can come back and join us again. You can be our go-to skeptic.
I would love to. I enjoy talking to you guys, and it really is a pleasure to talk to people who are knowledgeable about it, who I don't necessarily agree with, but that are willing to engage in dialogue and just talk. I mean, again, I think ultimately, we're all on the same page. I think that we're all looking for the same thing. We're looking for truth behind it, and we just may approach it from different ways. But I think it's all good.
And who knows, maybe sometime we'll do a off-the-air podcast only where we can all drink and swear at each other, too.
Awesome. That'd be great.
All right. Thank you. Have a great night.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right. That does it for this week's show. Next week, I won't be here, but Matt Moniz will be here, and we're trying to get Chris Balzano to step into the big chair, even though it'll be, virtually. But we're going to try to get him to host the show because we have a couple of authors coming on to talk about fictional books that actually have some topics that hit close to home. So stay tuned. That'll be on at regular time next week. I'll be at the Celtics game, but I'll try to check in if I can. So if there's no spooky TV going on, or if there's anything strange, the chat room will still be there and you can still use it. So until then, for Matt Moniz, for Matt Costa, for Chris Balzano, I'm Tim Weisberg, and we want you all to stay spooktacular.
First with local news, talk, and sports. This is WBSM New Bedford, Citadel Broadcasting, AM 1420, WBSM.
From ABC News, I'm Hillary Barsky. NATO says Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi escaped a missile strike in Tripoli on Saturday. According to a Libyan government spokesperson, Musa Ibrahim, the missile struck a compound where Gaddafi and his wife were staying, killing one of his sons and 3 grandchildren.
This was a direct operation to assassinate the leader of this country. This is not permitted by international law. It is not permitted by any moral code or principle.
ABC's Miguel Marquez is in Benghazi and says Eastern Libyans are elated by the news.
Benghazi has erupted into celebratory gunfire, everything from small weapons to look like very large 50 caliber weapons with the big tracers going out over the city, and even some fireworks off in the distance.
Volunteers are working to bring food, water, and other necessities to parts of the South ravaged by tornadoes. At least 342 people were killed across 7 states. ABC's Neil Karlinski is in Smithville, Mississippi, where an EF5 tornado touched down.
We met a woman who lost both of her parents. She rushed to her parents' house just minutes after the tornado strike, found her father sitting on a stoop. He was bloodied and battered, and all he said to her was, "I couldn't hold on to her," and then he passed out. He was talking about his wife of 43 years. She was blown out of his arms 20 feet away and killed. He suffered a heart attack as a result and passed away just 1 day later.
ABC's Neil Karlinski in Smithville, Mississippi. Thousands of people flooded an ancient Roman field for an all-night prayer vigil honoring Pope John Paul II on the eve of his beatification, remembering his teachings, travels, and his own suffering. A Washington tradition, the White House Correspondents' Dinner was held Saturday night in D.C. The black tie event includes the president, other Washington elite, and celebrities. You're listening to ABC News.
Mortgages should be illegal because you're getting robbed every month. For example, if you have a typical $200,000 30-year mortgage, you're going to end up paying over $400,000 after interest. That's almost $250,000 that you could be putting into your pocket instead of the bank's. I want to send you a powerful free CD to show you how. Hi, I'm John Commuta, creator of the Transforming Debt into Wealth system. My proven system can eliminate your mortgage and all your other debts using just the money you already make. That's right, no credit card debt, no car payment, no mortgage. It's easy, it works.
I will be able to pay off my house in approximately 2.5 years on a 30-year mortgage.
Stop getting robbed of your money and your future. Call now and I'll rush you a free CD today. Call 1-800-933-0939 for your free CD. Call 1-800-933-0939. That's 1-800-933-0939.
At the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, NASA engineers are working to diagnose the problem that grounded the space shuttle's final voyage. More from ABC's Gina Sunseri.
The astronauts aren't wasting the weekend. They get to spend some extra time with their families and squeeze in some more training. Engineers are trying to sort out why a heater cable failed and if it can be fixed in time for Endeavour to launch on its 25th and final mission Monday afternoon. Gina Sunseri, ABC News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
The tale of a cape which a famous singer never wore, now finally going to its rightful owner.
The daughter of James Brown, the godfather of soul, sued the tailors who made one of the singer's classic capes. Deanna Brown Thomas paid $7,000 for the cape in 2006, but her dad died a short time later, and despite numerous requests, the company, based in Ohio, never gave it to her. But just before the case went to a judge, Curtis and Marilyn Gibson agreed to give her the silver cape. James' daughter said the cape will go to a museum, and when asked how she felt, Deanna Brown told reporters outside the courtroom,
"I feel good. Couldn't say it any better."
Todd Ant, ABC News.
A California high school has taken top honors at the 2011 U.S. Academic Decathlon, besting competitors from all over the country and giving the Los Angeles Unified School District a record 12th national title. Officials say the 9-member team from Granada Hills Charter High School won on Saturday by a wide margin. This is ABC News.
Thank you for calling Rosetta Stone.